Good evening, friends, and welcome to Ghastly Manor. I've been expecting you. I know you are here seeking to enter the vault and to explore the gruesome collection of stories contained within. But beware, my friends, these stories are of a most disturbing nature. Now come in from the storm before you catch your death, and follow me to the vault. If you would please walk this way. My family and I used to go camping a lot when I was younger. Camping consisted of renting a cabin in the woods and spending a little time in the wilderness. So we consistently rented this cabin in Pennsylvania, where we would spend long weekends when everyone in the family had some time off. My two brothers and I, each being in the 9 to 12-year-old range, would always run off into the woods and bullshit about, while my parents did whatever. The cabin was on a mountain. If you followed a dirt road a ways past the cabin, the forest would open and there was a large field on the top. The field was about the size of a football field. Near the edge of the field, on the far side, was a graveyard. The graveyard was pretty small, about 20 graves, surrounded by a wrought iron fence. The fence was about 10 to 12 feet tall, with the Gothic-ish spikes on the top. The fence had a gate, but it was locked with a thick, rusty chain and padlock. Being kids, we were able to spread the gates apart enough to squeeze through. The small gravestones were very old and worn. I remember seeing one dated 1890-something. On top of one of the graves, just resting on it, was a smooth black stone. It looked like onyx or something, a little smaller than a golf ball, but not perfectly round. My older brother pocketed it. We digged around a little and left. Back at the cabin, which had one bedroom where my parents stayed, and large living room kitchen where we stayed, we were hanging out while my parents were sleeping in bed. It was probably around 11:30 or so at night when a loud bang happened at the front door, which is right in the living room. Me and my brothers were all scared shitless, understandably too afraid to answer the door. Again, the door shook moments later. It sounded like someone was trying to knock it off the hinges. My father emerged from the bedroom asking what the fuck was going on. The door clashed. He knew by the looks on our faces we had no idea. He grabbed a wood chopping axe we had and walked over to the door. He looked scared shitless himself. He swung the door open, and there was nothing but the night. No one in sight. After hounding us for information, and us having no idea, we went back to bed. I think no one slept much, if at all, that night. The next day, we were back to dicking around in the woods, and we again found ourselves in the old graveyard. The smooth black stone that my brother took was on top of the same grave. We ran. We ran fast. I was in Taiwan one year when I was younger. and had traveled to a busy night market. These are popular gatherings that usually operate in the evening. Nearby, I spotted a sign for a net cafe in a 5 to 6 story tall building. Thinking I'd fire off some quick emails, I walked in the dark, small entrance of the building. The building was older and hasn't been well maintained, but it's not out of the ordinary in Taiwan. The entrance just had a dark hallway that led to a small elevator. I pressed the elevator call button and entered. The elevator was uncharacteristically new compared to the building, but I didn't think much of it. Like some Chinese buildings, there wasn't a 4th floor. It's considered bad luck, since 4 sounds like death. So it just read 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, which was usual. I looked for the floor the net cafe was at, 6th floor, and pressed the button. It lurched into action quietly and began to ascend. When it stopped, I figured it was my floor, so I instinctively began to step out. Right before stepping out, however, the sight outside the elevator stopped me. It was pitch dark, only lit by the light of the elevator. It looked like it hasn't been occupied for decades, with some random pieces of furniture covered with white cloth or similar. It was a small building, so each floor were a single occupancy, so I could see pretty much the entire floor from the elevator. Thinking I must have gotten the wrong floor, I checked the light that indicates which floor you're on. Strangely, there was nothing. None of the indicators were on, but the floor button to the net cafe was still lit, so I know I haven't gotten there yet. All this happened within a couple of seconds. That's when I noticed a figure moving in the distance of the floor. It was not very visible, but I could make out what looks like a person dressed in some kind of gown, moving slowly towards the elevator. I was thoroughly creeped out, so I started pressing the close door button. As soon as I pressed it, the elevator light flickered off. I am this close to pissing my pants, and it's actually kind of freaking me out thinking back to it. The lights flickered back on in under a second, and the door closed. The elevator jolted back to life. A few moments later, it opened again to the net cafe. I am beyond relieved at this point. I walked out immediately and sat down at a computer. After gathering my wits a bit, I walked over to the cashier's desk and told him what I saw. The girl working there listened, and her face turned a bit ashen, so I asked her if she heard of similar. She told me that she's never experienced it, but some coworkers and occasional customers have brought it up. Basically, the building has 6 floors, and the 4th floor had a history. Apparently, the floor used to be a hair salon of sorts, until one of the employees killed herself there for some reason. She slit her wrists over the hair wash station and died. The store continued operations despite stories of weird appearances. When customers got their hair rinsed, the water would look a little red, like the customer was bleeding. Little things like that. And a couple of people reported seeing someone's figure walking away in the mirror. Naturally, the business closed down a few months later. The building owner tried to re-rent the place out, but never had any luck. Most businesses are quite superstitious, and no one wanted to rent the 4th floor after someone had died in it, even at a very cheap price. Finally, after dropping the price to nearly nothing, a stationery supply store wanted to rent. During the renovations of the floor, however, several accidents would happen. Tools would end up in strange places. A mirror from the previous business shattered when no one was near it. And finally, a worker had his hand jammed between the elevator doors when it closed on him unexpectedly. The workers refused to continue working, and finally, the business left, and the building owner finally gave up and shut down the floor. He then had the elevator company come in to replace the panel so that the elevator could not go to the 4th floor. Let me repeat that. The elevator was programmed to never go to the 4th floor. It doesn't even have a button. But for some reason, sometimes when people take the elevator, it would go to the 4th floor and the doors would open. And some, like myself, would see a figure walking around in the dark. So, I've had a long history with the paranormal. It started very young, and as I grew older, I started hunting for them. I decided to submit the long tale of how I got into this craziness. I was born in a small town called Penetanguishene, Ontario, Canada. Now, my dad told me that growing up in our first house, there was a lot of activity that was a little unnerving. I had a friend that my parents could not see. I described her as an older lady named Mary. Now, I would sit in my bedroom and listen to Mary tell me story after story for hours on end. My dad was very worried about this. Eventually, he decided to ask me about Mary. I started telling him about how she looked, what she would tell me, including a story about my dad breaking a statue when he was 9 years old. This caught my dad by surprise. Apparently, said statue was broken at his babysitter's, and as far as he knew, that babysitter had never told my grandma. He asked my grandmother about it, and she looked at him oddly as he told the story, then told him she had never heard of that story. This sent a chill down his spine. So he asked my grandmother what the first name of the babysitter was, as he had always called her Mrs. de Rockers. Her name was Mary Ann. My dad was floored. When he got home, he came into my room where I was talking to Mary. He just watched from the door as I sat there talking to some invisible person about my day and toys and anything else that was in my mind. Eventually, my parents came to see Mary as a positive, despite the odd things that would happen. For instance, when it got cold, blankets would inexplicably wrap over my sister and myself, yet the blankets were stored too high for us to reach. When asked, I would tell him about Mary bringing them. Not all the spirits of that house were good. As children, we were afraid of a separate room in the basement next to the laundry room. It was a barren concrete room. We used to complain of a terrifying man in there who was chained to the wall. As I grew older, I felt it was silly to be afraid of this man. Mary was long gone from my mind, and I would pass through the room with no issues. Until one day, when I was home with chickenpox, my grandmother was watching me. I was about 8 at the time. I was helping my grandmother with laundry when she had to bring up a basket of clean laundry. I knew how to work the washer and dryer and how to switch the clothes, so I did that while she ran up. I was almost done when I heard something weird from the next room, the barren room. I stopped and listened for it again. A few minutes went by and nothing happened. So I finished and went to turn on the dryer when I heard it again. It sounded like a chain being dropped. I stood in silence as I heard it again, then a metal dragging sound. I then made a very poor decision. I began walking toward the room. As I stepped inside the room, all the sounds had stopped. I saw nothing in the room. I stood there for several minutes just glancing around. Nothing stirred. I turned to leave when standing right there in the doorway was a tall, thin man, dirty and torn clothes draped on him. Around his leg was a long, rusty chain. I was frozen. He walked oddly. I could see the skin over his thin limbs stretch like elastic as he shambled towards me. This is where I fell over and covered up. I let out a blood-curdling scream until I felt hands on me. I started to scramble and fight back until I heard my grandmother's voice. "What is it? What's wrong?" I opened my eyes and realized my grandmother was holding me. My heart was racing and I blurted out the whole story. She just looked at me worryingly and brought me upstairs. We moved a few months later. I never set foot in that basement again. In my teenage years, I did some research and found out that the people who owned our house before had a son with a mental disorder of some sort. They abused and tortured the poor kid and chained him to that basement. His existence was not known until after his parents had passed and they found him chained in that basement. He had starved to death. The thought of that sends chills through me to this day. What's up, guys? Ghastly Ghoul here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed my debut video. I had a lot of fun putting it together, and boy, did I underestimate how much work it takes to get these videos put together. I'm just glad I met my self-imposed deadline for getting this out by Friday, April 8th. Local time, of course, because I have about, 50 minutes to spare. Probably about a half an hour by the time I upload this, but no worries. Anyway, I just want to say I've been a fan of the horror narrators here on YouTube for about a year now, and they are all really awesome guys and gals, and they have been great inspirations for me to start my own channel. I just want to give kudos to them, and I want to encourage you to please check out my list of subscriptions so you can go visit their channels. They are all really outstanding narrators. Really good content, really good videos. So, also, if you like my debut video, please click the thumbs up button, comment, and share. I would love to hear from you guys. Also, I would love to assemble a ghastly gang, so please consider joining by hitting that subscribe button. Doing this project, I found out how hard it is to find copyright-free stories to narrate. It would be awesome if you could email me your scary stories, and I'll include them in my future videos. My email address is below, as are my links to my Twitter and Facebook. And now, we must part ways, my friends. You are safe for the time being, but I fear you are living on borrowed time. For you never know what ghastly horrors await you in the vault.